Okay, so to talk to you a little bit about what Springboard did, you can see here that I'm on example A. I'm on page 116. I'm looking at their example. I'm going to point out that they solved this problem exactly the same way we would have. The first thing you notice about this problem, let me change colors real quick, is that this is a quadratic. A does equal 1. Yay. That means it's easy to solve. We are working, it's easy to factor. We are working with an inequality here. All you have to do is think of factors of 6. There's not very many factors of 6. By the way, it's a negative 6. There are not very many. Factors of negative 6 are 1 and 6, 2 and 3. Because it's a negative 6, one of these numbers has to be negative. We look over here for our hint. This is like a message they're sending us. This tells us that the bigger of the two numbers of the pair need to be negative. So the 6 is bigger than the 1, so it needs to be negative. The 3 is bigger than the 2, so it needs to be negative. When we combine those two together, that gives me a negative 5. That's not right. We can combine a 2 and a negative 3 together. That gives us a negative 1, and that's what we have right here. So this is the correct pair, which is why right here they have x plus 2 times x minus 3 is greater than or equal to 0. So they did the same thing we did. They just didn't show all the work. They took each factor, set it equal to 0. How do you solve this? Minus 2 minus 2. That's where they got that. Set x minus 3 equal to 0. How do you solve that? Add 3, add 3. That's how they got x equals 3. And they came down here and they put, they drew a number line. They put their zeros of negative 2 and 3. That's where this number comes from, went right here. This number right here went right here. Remind yourself why these are open circles. Why are these open circles? Because there is no bar. Don't forget about the cowboy and the angel. Cowboy has the hat, solid bar, bowed up, ready for a fight, got his cowboy boots on. The angel, face is open. She's got wings, so she doesn't need any shoes. Okay, so we have no bar, so our zeros are open. Now, notice that they don't have their parabola drawn. Our parabola, I will draw the parabola at the end to show you it still works the same way, but they're doing this a numerical approach. They're saying, okay, look, here's what we know. We know that this thing right here is a number, and we know this thing right here is a number, and they're multiplying these two numbers together. And the answer to this multiplication problem is a number that's bigger than 0. Well, what are we talking about when we say numbers that are bigger than 0? We're talking about positive numbers. So what all this is saying right here is that we know that we're going to multiply these two numbers together and our answer is going to be positive. What does that tell us? If we know that the answer to a multiplication problem is a positive number, that should tell us that either we multiplied two positive numbers together or we multiplied two negative numbers together. And so that's what they're doing down here. They are saying, okay, if this is one of my numbers, I now have this number line divided up into 3 sections. Do you see the 3 sections? Here's the 0. Ignore the shading for right now. If you want to just look at a different number line so that you don't have to look at the shading. We have a number line that has an open circle at negative 2 and a number line that has an open circle at 3. Don't worry about my scaling. I didn't worry about it. Do you see the number lines in 3 sections? You got this section of the number line, you've got this section of the number line, and you've got this section of the number line. And what they're doing down here is they're saying, okay, if I pick one of these x values and plug it into this number right here, what's going to be the sign of that number? Well, if you let's pick negative 5. You plug in negative 5 right there. Negative 5 plus 2, that's a negative number. That's why they have these little negative signs up here. Negative 5 plugged in right here, the answer is negative. Negative 4 right there, you plug that in. Negative 4 plus 2 is negative 2. All of the numbers, if you plug in any of these values in right here, you get a negative number. You plug those same numbers in down here, you also get a negative number because negative 5 minus 3, that's negative 8. So you get negative numbers right here. So if these are negative numbers right here, and these are negative numbers right here, what happens when you multiply a negative times a negative? You get a positive. So they're saying right here, these are negative numbers for this factor. These over here will be negative numbers for this factor. And if you multiply negative times a negative, you get a positive. So that's why they've gone back and shaded this to show you that these are positive values when you multiply those two things together. What about these numbers in the middle right here? If I pick 0 and I plug 0 in right here, if I plug in 0 right here, I have a positive number. That's why they have plus signs. If I plug in 0 into this problem down here, I get a negative number. That's why they have negatives down here. And when you multiply a positive number times a negative number, you get a negative answer. That's why this portion is not shaded, because we want only values of x that create positive numbers once we multiply. So these parts are not included because we have positive numbers from this factor, negative numbers from this factor. What happens if we pick a number over here from this group? Again, I plug in 5. You plug in 5 over here, 5 plus 2 is going to give me a positive number. You plug in a number over here into this thing, you get 5 minus 3. That's a positive number. So we have positive values being multiplied by other positive values. The result of that is going to be a positive value. So that's why they shaded this section. So this is another approach that you can use. It's a numerical approach because you're plugging and chugging and getting values. But if you notice this value of A right here is positive, that means my parabola is going to open up. Okay? And since my parabola opens up, then you will see that these numbers right here, these x values, are where my graph is above the x-axis. And for these x values, that's where this other end of the graph is also above the x-axis. This is where the graph is below the x-axis. So that's why those are negative values. So either approach will work. I am going to go ahead and stop this video, and I'm going to start the next video. I'm going to work 2 more examples. And actually, before I do that, I'm going to remind you of this. Remember when we were working with absolute value of, let's say, x plus 2 is greater than 3 or something like that? Or we could have had absolute value of x plus 2 is less than 3. We did a little memory thing where we said if it was pointing this way, it was always an or problem. If it's pointing this way, it's always an and problem. You can do the same thing with these up here. This one was pointing this way, so it's an or problem. And if you'll notice down here, I don't know if it'll let me scroll. You see right there where they put the word or? That's the way they wrote their answers. What numbers are shaded? All the numbers that are less than negative 2. What numbers were shaded over here? All the numbers that are greater than 3. You can't be a number that's less than negative 2 and greater than 3 at the same time. So you have to be in either one of the sets. So you have to say or. Either less than negative 2 or greater than 3. So you can tell that by looking at the problem. You can say, oh, it's pointing, toward the right, so it's an or. If it's pointing toward the left, it's going to be an and. Okay, so now I'm going to stop the video, and the next video will have the next 2 examples from Try These A.